In our last screencast, we talked about the different causes that led to the War of 1812. This time, we're going to focus on the different events and the different battles that happened throughout the war. If you recall, we had James Madison, who finally surrendered to the um, kind of pressure of those war hawks in Congress, led by Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, and asked Congress to eventually officially declare war on Britain. And so that happened on June 18th of 1812. Officially, the United States and Britain were at war with each other once again. Early on in the war, though, it was not as easy as the war hawks kind of made it seem to the rest of the country. This was not a quick war. Uh, on land, the Americans were suffering defeat after defeat early on in the war. On the water, things were faring a little bit better for the United States, even though our Navy definitely was a fraction of the size of the British Navy. What helped was the fact that most of the British fleet wasn't here in the Americas. Most of the British fleet were positioned in other parts of the world at that time, especially over in Europe, where there was still war going on against Napoleon. So the full British forces and their full British naval forces were not over here. So even though we had fewer ships, our ships were newer, and so we were able to maneuver and put up a pretty good fight against the British on water. Um, However, those early battles here in the US, most of them were taking place along the Canadian border. The United States really had this idea of trying to invade Canada and take Canada over, but those land battles proved to be pretty disastrous for the US soldiers. The Battle of Detroit is one of them, where the Native Americans, led by Tecumseh, right? If you remember, he fled up to Canada after the Battle of Tippecanoe. Tecumseh and new Native American forces that were now allied with the British were able to take over Fort Detroit. Many of the American militia troops were taken captive. Many surrendered. You had a lot of U.S. troops who didn't want to fight in Canada because they felt that they didn't have to fight in foreign land. So it wasn't really a great front for the U.S. early on in the war. Another U.S. defeat happened at the Battle of Frenchtown. Also, again, we saw this combined Native American and British forces that took over this territory. Many of the U.S. troops were actually killed in the Battle of Frenchtown. So sometimes it's referred to as the River Raisin Massacre because just of the number of American forces that were killed during this battle. So it's not going to be until September of 1813 that we begin to see our first victories from the U.S. forces. And this happens first on water, the Battle of Lake Erie being one of them. Here, under the command of Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, right, the U.S. fleets are actually able to defeat the British fleets on Lake Erie, giving control to Lake Erie to the U.S. Army. And that's really a major victory because now controlling the lake, there's also this new fostered sense of hope. And so the U.S. troops are kind of able to gain some more strength and to keep on the offensive with this new victory. Oliver Hazard Perry sends word to the general of this area, which was William Henry Harrison, and he has a very famous quote that said, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." Right, and so this is what sets the U.S. into this kind of new position where they feel that they can really maybe have a chance against the British. So with this new sense of hope, William Henry Harrison is actually going to now attack the British and Native American forces in the Battle of the Thames. And here in Canada, they're actually able to successfully defeat the British in the native attack. And here, Tecumseh is actually going to be killed in this battle, which is going to be a harsh blow to the Native Americans. And we begin to see here the alliance between the Native Americans and the British start to weaken after the death of Tecumseh. So that's really going to have a huge impact on the relationship between those two. And we also begin to see just the Native American forces and their kind of fervor or kind of like power against the Americans to start to weaken as well, right? Their kind of sense of continuing to fight starts to weaken after the death of Tecumseh. So they're kind of feeling already kind of defeated in all of this of what's been going on. So these are like the earliest battles that we start to see a turnaround and where we start to see the US finally to start have some victories here in the War of 1812.